Well, I know it's been a long time coming, but we're finally going to be updating some of the older builds we've uploaded from before when the game was first released, and rightfully so. There's been patches, there's been tests done, so these things need to be updated if you guys want to refine some of the builds that you've made as we've learned things, as weapons have been changed, as the way the mechanics work have changed. We will need to update the build. So the first one I want to update is actually our strength build. If you've been watching some of my most recent videos, you'll know that I recently did kind of like a PvP montage and weapons breakdown analysis for the Fume Ultra Greatsword. Now, this weapon is unique. It was in Dark Souls 2. It was even in Demon Souls, known as the Dragon Bone Smasher, kind of. I think that's what From Software was really going for with this weapon. But it's a really unique weapon. It has S scaling with strength. It gets a lot of scaling from strength beyond even 50, I believe. The soft cap isn't at really 40. You get even more points of damage as you level up past 40 with strength, because most weapons, their scaling tips off at around 40, but not so much with the Fume Ultra Greatsword and the Yorm Great Machete. But nonetheless, this weapon is one of the if not the largest Ultra Greatsword in the game right now. I think it is actually the largest. It has the most range, and I covered this weapon a little bit in depth in that other video. But we did use it on the strength build, and there was a reason for that, and it's because we've recently been using this build a little bit more now that we've refined it. So this was first made, I think, about 3 weeks ago, and I just recently went back to it and started playing around, and this is what our stat screen looks like now. So our health up to 39. This is pretty much standard across every build I make now, more or less. You know, some of them will be a little bit different, but if you're not focused on like spells in any way, shape, or form, if you're focused on damage, on strength, dexterity, whatever it might be, luck, whatever, you should be having 39 health, because with the life ring plus 3 and the ring of favor plus 2, you're at 1801 health, which is a lot of health to work with when you're in PvP matches. Our attunement, we bumped that up to 14. And that's just so that we can have 2 attunement slots. This is something I'm going to cover in a separate video in depth, but the Tears of Denial, I'm thinking more and more is kind of like a staple for PvP. Again, it's going to vary on the build, but for most standard like damage heavy builds, I think that the Tears of Denial is definitely something to go for. And plus, the extra attunement is kind of good because it gives you a little bit more FP to work with, but that's beside the point. Endurance up at the max at 40. You don't really need the full 40 endurance, I think, with the strength build. It's nice to have because the heavy weapons that you are using on this class do take up a lot of stamina. But if you had down to like 37, you'd be fine. But again, the way that I play, I like to rush enemies down. I like to always have stamina available, so that's why I put my endurance up to 40. Vitality, we've cut at 22, which gives us, with the Ring of Favor plus 2, 66.3 equip load. And what's nice about this as well is we get a little bit more equip load with the Havel Ring plus 2. As you can see there, we go from 66 up to 78. So we essentially gain 12 points of equip load, which basically allows us to use that Fume Ultra Greatsword right at 70% after we've cast our Tears of Denial. Because if you look there, the next thing I want to talk about is the Faith. It's only at 10, and at the beginning of PvP matches, we start off with the Priestess Ring equipped so that we can cast our Tears of Denial, and then we can de-equip it and put on the Havel Ring if we're going to use the Fume Ultra Greatsword or some other ring like the Sun Princess Ring or whatever other ring you want to use in its place. So we just use the Priestess Ring as kind of like a little bit of an exploit to use Tears of Denial. We do have to put our Faith up to 10, but we get the extra 5 points of Faith from that ring. So we can cast Tears of Denial, and then we don't need the extra 5 points. We can put it somewhere else, or we can use the Knight's Ring or something like that if you wanted an extra bit of damage as well. Strength obviously at 50, just in case we do end up wanting to one-hand the Fume Ultra Greatsword, and we also get a lot of scaling from 50 strength on a lot of our strength weapons, because as you can see here, we infuse everything more or less with heavy, so that we can gain the most scaling from our strength. Our dexterity only at 18, just so that we can use a few basic weapons. I like using the Black Knight Great Axe before it was nerfed, but you know, things like the Goddard Twin Swords and other, you know, kind of medium weapons that we want to use, like smaller or medium weapons that require a little bit of dexterity, we would have access to at 18 dexterity. So intelligence and luck just at their standard, and that's pretty much the attribute breakdown of how we've respec'd the class. Armor, once again, it's going to matter based on personal preference. I like to be, if you've watched any of my other videos, between 20 and 25% absorption, so that I know generally how much damage I'm going to take based on what weapons the enemies are using. So this setup I think looks nice as well. As you guys can see there, has some decent fashion souls with it, I personally think. but that's just me. Ring setup, again, life ring, we switch that out if we get hit, or as soon as we take our first hit, we switch that out really quickly. I like the stamina ring personally, it's just personal preference. Ring of Favor +2, a staple because it increases all your stats. And that's pretty much the refinement to the build. So it's really the difference in the stat breakdown that's changed a lot, because I used to put a lot more points into vitality, but I've really shifted towards kind of the Tears of Denial and the endurance and health thing now, because I do believe that health is more important than armor. So having a lot of points in vitality isn't really super important, but you know, decent armor is still, you know, you still want to have some kind of armor, some decent armor, because whether you equip something that's really heavy or really light, you're still going to get a base increase in your defense, for those of you that don't know. So for example, look at my defense stat, and if I de-equip my headpiece, you're going to see that 154 drop down. You can see there it goes to 138. Now, whether I equip the Alva Helm or I equip the Sage's Blindfold, the only difference is the absorption that I'm going to end up taking in or reducing damage by. The actual defense stat remains to increase by, I think that's 16 points, right? So no matter what kind of headpiece you use, whether it's something that weighs like 1 or, you know, like 0.3 or whatever it might be, at least equip some kind of armor so you can at least gain the base increase in the defensive stat, right? The only thing that changes with armor is really the absorption, and again, from what we know from basic testing, is that absorption times your defense gives you a multiplicative bonus to your defense stat. So keep that in mind. But one other thing that could be useful, or is useful, I find personally, is the extra bit of poise you get from armor. You can roll through attacks without getting staggered out. You seemingly get a few extra hyper armor frames so that your startup of the attacks don't get knocked out of as often. And that's really important for heavy weapons, because when you start up a heavy weapon attack, you definitely want it to come out, because one of the main things with a strength build is focusing on trades. You have access to these heavy weapons because they require a lot of strength. They have good scaling. You definitely want to be able to come up with your attack every time you swing it, especially if an enemy is trying to roll in at you with a small weapon. You want to be able to trade big and come out on top with that. So that is the refinement to the build. Again, our weapons breakdown and stuff like that are pretty much the same. Any heavy weapon that you would possibly want to access in the game, you'd have access to with a strength build. But I'm going to showcase the actual PvP matches in a separate video like we normally do. And I'm going to be using some of the weapons that aren't really so common. So we basically dedicated a whole episode to the Fume Ultra Greatsword. I've covered the Lorien Greatsword as well. You guys know that Greatswords in general are really, really good. What I might cover is this bad boy, the Heavy Cathedral Greatsword, which I haven't really used all too much. But basically with this one, the weapon art stomp is a little bit different with kind of like a slashing attack. So it could be useful. We'll see. I'm going to try to use it in some PvP matches, see how it does. The Drang hammers actually has some of the highest combo damage in the game. When you combo the R1 into L2, R2, it can deal some really heavy damage. If you guys thought the combos with the God of Twin Swords and the Sellsword Twin Blades were really high, the Drang Hammer outdoes both of those in terms of combo damage. The Dark Sword, again, that's just something that was really used at the beginning of the game. I'm not going to use that all too much. The Zweihander, I think I pronounced that right, is a weapon that's kind of overlooked. It is actually kind of like, if not better than, the Astora Greatsword. I mean, the Astora Greatsword is really good, but what I like personally about the Zweihander is the fact that it has the normal stomp uppercut, which the Astora Greatsword does not. I know that some people like the thrusting attack with the Astora Greatsword, and if you can hit an opponent, that's great. You're going to do some amazing damage, but I usually find that when you're fighting good opponents, you're not going to ever really hit them with that spear attack unless you really catch them out on something or bait them into something and are able to start up the attack and hit them really close and punish them. But the stomp is always useful, as I've demonstrated in countless PvP videos. It is something that you can always kind of rely on, even if you don't follow up with anything. Just throwing out the stomp kind of weakens the enemy's approach to you. They're going to kind of back off unless they're kind of foolish and they want to contest you, in which case, you know, you bust out that uppercut and you're going to deal a ton of damage to them. So, you know, the Zweihander is very good for that because it also weighs very little, and its attribute requirement is also very little. So you can actually incorporate this weapon in a lot of lower strength and dexterity builds, just like the Astora Greatsword. The only difference is it does have the stomp, weapon art, which in my opinion is just a bit better. But again, that's personal preference. So aside from those, I may go back to the Gundyr halberd just because I didn't really use it all too much, and when I did use it, I didn't really find it all that consistent. But we're gonna try to use it again, so I'll see if I can give you guys some tips if you want to see that. And if you do want to see any other weapons, please let me know. I will more than happy break them down or test them and then break them down for you guys in that PvP video. We're not gonna cover the Exile Heavy or the Heavy Exile Greatsword because we've already covered that, and it's obviously a very, very good weapon. But yeah, that's pretty much the strength build as it stands, guys. So stay tuned for the PvP video. I will link it in the description and at the end of this video when it is up. But let me know what you guys think, what you guys want to see, what else you want me to update or cover. Thank you for watching, guys. Quantum is out.
Ah, you're so